Awesome. Thank you so much. So good morning and welcome to XRM Virtual, and thank you for your patience with our technical difficulties. My name is Julie Yak, and I'm going to breeze right through these announcements so we can get down to Chris and Gage and helping us work through our IFD deployments. As you just heard, we are recording. Keep an eye out for the recording link later on today. I'm sure Chris and Gage will be sharing some pretty good information with us that we'll all want to reference later on. We're always looking for new speakers. I have a new speaker in the wings that we're just working on getting his dates set up. So if there's something you'd like to present, if you want to get started presenting to user groups, let me know. We'd love to help facilitate that. If there's a topic you'd like to hear that you don't want to present, let me know. That's how we have Chris here today. Someone sent me an email and said, hey, let's talk about IFD. So I said, I know the guy. We've got hopefully a meeting coming at the end of June on free developer tools. Then we've got Colin in July talking about some Adoxio Connect framework. And the guy in the wings that I was talking about is wanting to speak with our group about TypeScript. So if there's anything else you want to learn about, just let me know. We always like to do cross-promotion with the CRM UG folks. You'll see they promote our meetings here on the screen. And if you have either yourself or others in your organization that need to learn more than the developer topics, head on over to crmug.com and look at their different meetings that they have available. They're always presenting good stuff. The CRM UG Focus event in St. Louis went over really well. I want to say 100, 150 people or so in the CRM-ish environment. So that went really well. Lots of good attendance and lots of good interaction with the attendees. We've got some bigger conferences coming up later on this year. Hopefully we'll have a chance to see some of you there. And with that, I'm going to pass over to Chris. And Chris, once I hear your voice, I'm going to go on mute.
Okay, thank you, Julie.
Perfect.
Set up our presentation here, and thank you everybody for joining. I'll take control. And if you guys can just let me know when you guys can see that. Everybody can see that? Okay, Engage, can I hear you?
Yep, I can see it.
Okay, great. Hey guys, well thanks for welcoming us to the XRM user group. My name is Chris Cognetta. I'm director at TriBridge for the CRM team. I'm also one of the Microsoft MVPs. I also have Gage Panisi, who's a manager on our team, joining us. So glad to have everybody here and glad we can present this topic for you. A lot of content, 54 slides in less than 60 minutes. So we'll do our best to answer questions as they come out. Gage and I will watch the chat window or unmute yourself if you can and talk with us. We can make it as interactive as you guys would like. So the session agenda today, we'll cover what is ADFS and IFD, prepping and planning for your installation, the overall installation and configuration, the setup for IFD, the WAP installation if you're looking at having a proxy in front, the trust for that, some tips and tricks, and then some closing questions and answers in case something that we haven't covered. Again, my name is Chris Cognetta. I'm director for the CRM practice at TriBridge. I've been a CRM MVP, 365 MVP, Business Solution MVP. We got multiple hats that we wear for about 6 years now. I'm also the founder of the Azure and CRM UG Medic teams. You may have seen us run around with lab coats at different events to be able to talk to people and help them solve their problems. If you've guessed, my background is infrastructure and application architecture. So you'll find me in many of those conversations on forums and helping folks implement Dynamics across the world. Done way over 250 upgrades. I don't even count anymore, and at least 100 with ADFS. My blog is cognettacloud.net, and my Twitter handle is ccognetta. So if you want to follow me, that'd be great. Gage?
Yep. Hi, everyone. My name is Gage Panisi. I'm a manager with our client field engineering team of the CRM practice. Typically, my day-to-day operations involve CRM and Dynamics 365 implementations, installations, upgrades, installing ADFS, working with anything infrastructure related in terms of CRM. I've been with TriBridge 5 years as of 2 days ago. And if you want to read my blog, it's blog.gagepanisi.com, and feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn.
Excellent. And thank you, Gage, for joining us in the presentation. So ADFS and IFD overview. What is ADFS? So ADFS is Microsoft's secure token service or Active Directory federated services. In the current version of Windows Server, it automatically is a role that you can install. It's being used for security with integration for your Windows Live, Office 365, Azure integration, etc. So a lot of people are talking about it. It's a hot topic. Been pretty much around CRM since the late early 2011 days. But basically, it's a claims-based authentication that will set up IFD, which is the internet-facing deployment of CRM. And that's what enables things like the mobile apps and even the Excel extract tools to work. And if you have any third-party cloud ISVs like Click Dimensions or others, they're also looking to talk to your system through IFD. So why is ADFS so challenging to implement? And really, if you look at all of these red items below, at some point in time, somebody who's implementing ADFS will need to know about these items. And if you look at it, there's not many people that know all of those skills in one group. And it usually, when we go and sit down with an organization to implement this, there's probably 5 or 10 people in the room. And I haven't even mentioned that the security officer is wanting to know, all the good things that they ask about how it's secure, how's it been implemented, etc. So if you look at these things and they look unusual to you, I encourage you, go out, let your fingers do the walking, learn some about these things before you attempt to implement ADFS. It'll help you a lot. So overall, there's 2 different ways to use ADFS. When you set it up internally, and this is straight from the ADFS Microsoft guide that we have actually helped edit it, but if you start down here at the client level, you can see the request goes to CRM. The request will then be rejected, which will then say, hey, I need to go off. I'm an internal client. Get me a Kerberos. So we'll then look across, and it'll say, hey, get me the authentication from Active Directory, and then it'll come back and it'll connect to Microsoft CRM. Vice versa, on the other side, what happens externally is it's going to actually redirect to ADFS first, and then ADFS has a trust to connect to Active Directory. The difference is the Kerberos ticket is allowed to connect in the internal flow where it's not allowed externally. The URLs for ADFS and what's happening are very confusing to a lot of people. A lot of people don't understand that the system is looking at the complete URL end to end. It's inspecting the whole thing, so it can do multiple functions through the same URL. So that's why it's very important that your DNS entries, etc., are set up correctly, and we're going to talk through that as well. So preparation and planning, how to prepare. Because these technologies we spoke about, you need an organization, you need to have a teamwork, and you need a team, and you need to pre-plan things such as setting up your DNS entries, getting your SSL wildcards, setting up firewall rules, all these kind of things. Web application proxy server, the DMZ, a dedicated machine for it, which is recommended, and the ADFS service account. So a lot of people don't realize that it actually takes all of these DNS entries to make Dynamics CRM work with ADFS. So when you look at them, the primary or private DNS entries, which would be internal, are the ADFS, yourdomainname.com, your actual organization name, which is very important, especially for those of you doing multi-tenant. The organization name would be your org name.domain.com. That's what ADFS uses to direct to which multi-tenant that you're actually going to connect to. The auth domain that talks auth.domain.com, which talks directly to the ADFS server. The disco domain, which is for discovery. If you're doing any external development and you want to connect and consume the CRM SDK from external, you'll need to expose that as well, and that's why it's marked optional under public. And then the internal domain name.com, which is how you reference the internal server. So internal crm.domainname.com is typically what's used there. public DNS entries, you have to expose the ADFS, the org name, and the auth domain outside your organization. So those will be hosted in your provider, and you'll add them to your domain, and then they'll forward back to your firewall and be distributed. Again, the Disco domain is optional if you want to open up services. Typically, it's not installed out of the bat, and you add it later on, which can be done later on. So some notes about the DNS entries. Each organization requires its own DNS, as I spoke about earlier. So if you're a multi-tenant organization, you will have multiple org names, but singular ADFS and auth. A lot of people confuse that with test and prod domains, etc. Each system will have its own ADFS server and will have its own set of org names and auth. So for test, for example, you might have ADFS test, org name.test, auth.test, etc. Also, alias and CNAME records should not be used. You really want to use host entries. I've seen people play around with this, have mixed results on their virtual machines and things like that. But listen, it's not about a virtual machine. It's about working in a enterprise level architecture between firewalls, etc. You want to use the host records to ensure that ADFS will know where to communicate. Some ways that we see that when you're doing that with your DNS guy, ask them to snapshot the DNS records so that you can confirm they're all host entries. I've seen people go through hours and hours of troubleshooting only to find out that they didn't use host entries and they can't figure out why ADFS wasn't working. They did nothing wrong except for the fact that the DNS guy let them down and didn't follow. So SSL certificates, there's really only 2 supported, and as far as we're concerned, only one is really recommended, which is the wildcard. Wildcard domains used to be a big no-no. Security would be like, no, we need to break it all up, etc. But with today's mobile-based infrastructures, Exchange servers, Office 365, etc., a lot of people have a certificate for star.domain. That same certificate should be used for CRM. You can use a subject alternative name certificate and add all the URLs there for CRM and ADFS. The challenge with that is if you have maintenance or you add an org or you want to change a name, you're going to have to recreate and reissue that SAN certificate, which can be pretty hard in regards to keeping it for your maintenance window. Some other considerations are the pricing. The price for the wildcard versus individual. Also the renewal and maintenance. So a wildcard typically will last 36 months if you set it up that way. Some people, are doing it every 12 months. So that means every 12 months you're going to have to change your certificate in your ADFS server, which happens to be one of the #1 trouble tickets around ADFS is all of a sudden it came in on Monday and my stuff is not working. Some security people don't like wildcards. So again, point into the documentation on where that is. The SHA-256 is not only it's required, not recommended. TLS 1.0, there's some issues with that in regards to security. We're working towards Microsoft issuing a patch to work with higher than 1.0. If you have a PCI compliant environment, that's going to get red tagged, and Microsoft is working at that. Yeah, Mike. Unfortunately, they don't have the 2.0 for the on-premise version today. I've heard people with workarounds and hot fixes, but I don't have anything I can officially point to today, and that's why 1.0 is still required. Mobility, ISV requirements, that's another reason why people are having this. You can also not have multiple certificates on the CRM deployment. It'll only use one certificate, whether it's SAN or wildcard for all the links. So you can't have 3 different certificates. It won't reference them. And then finally, if you're using a third-party CA, you must use it. You can't have it published internally, as nobody outside would be able to see that. Absolutely, Gene. We will provide the PowerPoint after. It's a very common request, as there's a lot of data, and you can tell I'm moving pretty fast to capture everything. So from a firewall perspective, there's multiple ways to set up ADFS. This is the most common. You have your firewall on port 443. The URL is then rerouted once it's connected, and then you'll have your ADFS server and a CRM web server, provided that they're on 2 separate boxes. Highly recommend port 443. If you're behind somebody else's infrastructure, Like for instance, if you're at TriBridge Corporate and you try to do ADFS outside or try to do a 444 port going outside, you'll be blocked. Most companies only allow 80 and 443 outbound. So if you're doing a demo or you're trying to access your system from someone else's machine, which is very common today, you won't be able to get there. Yes, Windows 2012 ADFS is supported and the preferred recommendation. The Windows 2008 server still not working. Sorry, still about TLS 2.0. So Mike, it's not a Azure or Windows issue. It's more of a CRM issue dealing with supporting TLS 1.0 or higher. That's the problem that we're working through. Again, if you follow along on our blogs, I recently received a hot fix. If I can get that hot fix published for everybody, I will get that out there. Are you talking Dynamics 365? So Dynamics 365 from our perspective is CRM 2016 with a patch. And as far as I know, that infrastructure has not been fixed, Gene, for the 2.0. So the WAP is another way that you can set up the request where you have a proxy server. There used to be an ADFS proxy back in the 2011 days. It's now been replaced with WAP. Gage is going to talk more detail about us installing the app when we get to that section, but for the most part, the WAP server will sit outside. It'll gather your internal request from the DMZ, and then it will do the proxying between the CRM web server and the ADFS server. So from a WAP perspective is probably what we see a lot of people doing when they want to expose the proxy out there. You can have multiple servers, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. I mean, are you talking about setting up IFD on 2016? Yes, what we're talking about applies from 2011 all the way through to D365. Again, here's a graphical version of what it looks like in regards to connection. Yes, we have seen people go right through their firewall and point their web server open straight to outside with no firewall or nothing. We don't recommend that you do that, but we have seen it. Option 2 is the web application proxy with a single web server running CRM and ADFS. Option 3 is using the web proxy and a CRM web server sitting out in the DMZ. That keeps most client communications on those boxes. It also isolates traffic so that your internal users and their resources are not being used to serve up external people. And then additionally, web application proxy can then filter everybody off and talk to the two ADFS CRM servers and completely removing the web proxy. Depending on your environment, if you have a DMZ or not, there's all different reasons on why you would pick one of these options. We just wanted to present the different architectures so you can see what it looks like and really the complexity of what you're dealing with. So I'm going to switch over to the ADFS installation, and Gage is going to take us through the screenshots and slides, and I'll just be your slide presenter there, Gage.
Sounds good. All right. So if anyone's familiar with ADFS 2.0, you know you had to go out actually to a Microsoft site and download the executable to install it. As of ADFS for Server 2012 and 2012 R2, as well as 2016, though it's not supported, you just now add the Active Directory Federation Services role from the Add-in Features wizard in your Server Manager. So basically you'd kick off that wizard, run through the installation. It's basically next, finish. And Chris, next slide.
Yep, so again, you'll see that Gage is on the server role scenario. He's selecting Active Directory Federated Services.
Yep, and once the role is installed, it'll prompt you to launch the configuration wizard. When you prompt the configuration wizard, you'll see you have two options right off the bat. The first being create the first federation server in a federation server farm, and the other being add a federation server to a federation server farm. Most typically, you're going to choose the first option. And with these newer versions of ADFS, everything is considered a farm, even though if you only have one ADFS server, it's not technically a farm. So when you click next on that screen, you'll get prompted for your credentials.
This is where we were talking about the certificate as well. You can see you can only pick one certificate, so you can't use multiple certificates. That's why the wildcard or SAND is required.
Yep. And if you're not logged onto the ADFS server as a domain administrator, you'll need to provide the credentials for domain admin to continue on to this screen. Going forward, on the screen on the left is where you would select your SSL certificate. Now, the Federation service name, if you are using a wildcard, it'll populate this, the asterisk.domain.com. And what you need to change there is what you want it to be for your ADFS endpoint. So typically it's something like adfs.domain.com, sts.domain.com, something along those lines. Basically whatever you set up DNS for already. The display name is just what will appear on the ADFS login screen. So you can put your company name, you can put CRM, Dynamics 365 login, whichever you prefer. The next screen will be for the specifying of the service account. Unless you're using group managed service accounts, you'll just want a basic domain account set up for this purpose.
Yeah. And
next slide.
Yeah, and note that that is a domain account. So the domain accounts for ADFS and your CRM boxes are all going to be a part of that domain.
So on the left side, you'll see the specify configuration database screen. I would say unless you are a huge enterprise, you're going to be running Windows internal database for this. You can spin up a complete SQL Server instance for this and create a database within standard SQL Server, but most of the time you can just use the Windows internal database. Yeah,
and some of the reasons why people don't want to use a SQL Server database is then you have to expose it. So if your ADFS server is sitting outside in your DMZ, you have to expose that connection to SQL Server to read to that database, and that's another reason why people will use the internal Windows database. No worries, if you're running the farm, it's replicated across to all the different servers that are out there. It's not something that you need to worry about backups or anything like that. If you have multiple front ends for ADFS, then you're fine.
Okay. And then on the next screen, it's just a review of the options, and you can click next. Next slide, Chris. And this slide is kind of here just for formalities. It'll check its prerequisites and install.
If not, you'll get a bunch of error messages in there about items that you need to fix, like maybe you have the wrong password in a service account. You can then go back, change it, and then rerun the check again, very much like the CRM installation.
Yep. Now, when you complete the installation, the first thing you want to do is verify that you can pull back the Federation metadata. So to do this, you just enter the URL into a browser, preferably from a server other than the ADFS server, just to verify it's available from somewhere outside of the server itself. You should get back an XML file. If you get basically a bunch of text that doesn't look like a formatted XML file, that's fine. That typically just means that CRM is not running in compatibility mode, so it's displaying it a little funky.
Yeah, your browser settings will also determine what you see here. So if you did not trust your domain, this information will come up garbled. Also of note, if you do not see that this is allowed through, like there's no certificate error on this site, don't proceed, because that means you have a certificate issue. So it must come up with no certificate error.
So the next step after ADFS is set up is configuring the CRM side to talk to ADFS. And before we get into those wizards and that, there's a couple prerequisites that you want to take care of. The first being certificate permissions. Basically, the CRM app pool account that's running in IIS needs permissions to read the private keys on the SSL certificate being used. So just pop open in a mix, the MMC, and pull up the certificate, snap in, and assign those permissions as needed. Next slide, Chris.
Yeah, the MMC is the Microsoft Management Console. If you guys don't know what it is, it's how you can manage your keys, etc. So you would just open it up, you would find the keys for that machine, then import that certificate. A lot of people get this confused with the creation of a certificate. This is not the creation of an SSL certificate. This is just allowing the app pool to have access to manage that key.
And once you got the private key permission set, you'll launch your CRM Deployment Manager, and you'll pull up the properties. in the property screen, you're going to want to set the internal URL to all of these web service endpoints, and then select the HTTPS binding type.
And note, that is what your new server name internally is going to be. So that's that DNS for internal. If you hit that DNS, internalcrmdomain.com, you're going to have a Kerberos connection to this server at this point in time. That's your internal link. Some people just call it internal. Some people drop CRM. But primarily, you want to make sure your internal users are using this link so they're not governed by the ADFS timeout internally.
So you'll continue on with the configure claims-based authentication wizard. On the first screen is really the only place you would enter something confusing. You're going to enter the federation metadata, that URL that you tested earlier to verify your ADFS deployment. You'll click next. You'll select your certificate that should already be installed and set up. And then you'll go through a couple more next screens, and you'll get to here and you'll click finish.
And you'll get error messages there if it can't read the certificate or it can't connect, etc. But if you configured it successfully, you'll end up here. That's why we recommend that you check that URL prior to going through the claims-based wizard. Okay. And by the way, the wizard, you can keep walking through it. So if it fails, there's nothing that broken. You don't have to reinstall CRM. You just keep going through it until it can complete successfully. Another thing that you keep seeing here is these IIS resets in between these steps. Make sure you do them. ADFS is very, very picky on the state of the server, the tokens, etc. You want to make sure that you're currently refreshing IIS to handle it. And a lot of people like to say IIS doesn't exist anymore, but certainly that there's a brand of it that's still being impacted.
So at this point, you'll have claims-based authentication configured for the CRM server, which is different than IFD. And Larry, as you're pointing out, copying that URL it's a good method to make sure you don't mess up typing in that URL. And you want to take that URL from that log and test it out on the ADFS server just to verify that you're pulling now the CRM metadata similar to how you pulled the ADFS.
Yeah, and if you see that log right there, if you click that, that'll open up the text log and you can grab it. If you've done enough ADFS implementations, you'll know this URL by heart. It's something that we like to laugh in the academy classes and test people on to spit that out right out of their memory. If you've done it enough times between test, dev, and production, you'll know that URL by heart.
Yep. So now that you got claims-based set up on the CRM side, you'll want to go back to your ADFS server and set up the relying party trust for the internal URL here. So you'll just go into the ADFS management console, click on Add Relying Party Trust, and essentially there's 3 rules that need to be configured. There's the pass-through UPN, pass-through primary SID, and transform Windows account name to name. Getting these three rules absolutely correct is essential. If you do not, you'll most likely get error messages when you try to authenticate.
Yeah, and just try to use the documentation. All the rules are listed as far as what they are. They feel like they're the same. I like to use the same names as the documentation so you know what they're doing. But basically, if you read through that, the SID is the Active Directory SID. The UPN is how it's going to communicate back and forth, and then translating the logon name to a Windows account name is also what's happening here. So those rules and those orders have to be there. Otherwise, you can experience a lot of problems.
Yep, so now that you have claims-based authentication set up, you want to configure CRM Dynamics 365 for internet-facing deployment, or more commonly referred to as IFD. Simply put, you'll go back into the CRM Deployment Manager and click on the Configure Internet-Facing Deployment wizard. When you get into this wizard, you'll click Next to get things rolling. You'll come to this screen that you can see here. The first 2 boxes are going to be just your domain name. So it'll be just domain.com, domain.com. The third box is that discovery URL, previously referred to in the DNS entries, disco.domain.com.
Yeah, and that's what ties back to if you need the discovery service available from outside your domain. So you have developers or a portal or something that's happening, third-party ISV out in the cloud. They're going to ask for that URL if it's open or not. So that's where that DNS comes in. You don't have to expose it if everything's going to stay internal. Not talking about mobile forms, not talking about any of that, just third-party ISVs or custom app development, then you would need to open that up. And that's where it ties back to the DNS entries.
And on the next screen is where you enter the auth.domain.com URL. Simply put, that's the external deployment URL. It's the URL for the entire CRM Dynamics 365 deployment. It's not used by users, but it is used in the redirect process between CRM and ADFS.
And of course,
so then
IIS reset.
Yep, you'll finish the IFD wizard, run IIS reset, and then head back on over to your ADFS server. And you'll set up the relying party trust for your external URL. Same 3 claim rules. Get them right, and you should be fine.
And you'll notice that they're added into the relying party trust. So when you click the first time, you'll only see internal. When you do the second one, you'll see the auth.
Yep. And new with ADFS Server 2012 R2 is the global authentication policies. Now, by default, ADFS does not come pre-configured for forms authentication for the internal network or the internal zone. So you got to go in there and you got to enable it. Otherwise, if you try the external URL from within your network, you'll get an ADFS error basically telling you this authentication method is not allowed from within the network.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people go through, again, set up everything but not see this part and cause a lot of problems trying to figure it out.
And at this point, everything should be working. You can test out the internal URL. Of course, that's going to just pass through the authentication. You get right into CRM or Dynamics 365. Then you test out the external URL, which is your organization unique name .domain.com. That should give you the ADFS page and prompt you for credentials.
And really, internally, if your browser is prompting you to log in, etc., then you have something wrong in your browser. It should be passing through your Kerberos directly to its single sign-on capabilities. If not, it's at the browser level, or there's something wrong with how your domain and is trusted through the setup. Sometimes those setups are pushed by group policy, and you'll need to have them overwritten by whoever controls the policy to update them if you don't have the rights to change it. And then, as Gage mentioned, as you go to the org name URLs, that's always externally. And a lot of people ask, does that mean I go outside my network and come back in? And the answer is no, because the org name itself, there is a DNS entry internally. ADFS is doing the translation for you when you enter the name in there and get the logon. But that'll allow you to do all your testing in regards to seeing what they look like, etc. And we'll show you more about adding the logo and those type of things coming up.
So next up is the WAP, or the Web Application Proxy. If you're familiar with ADFS in previous versions, there used to be the ADFS proxy, which was a little iffy here and there. Microsoft solution is now just to use the WAP. The beautiful thing about the WAP is you can use it for both ADFS and CRM. To install the WAP, just like with ADFS, you just go into the server manager, select it from the server roles, and install it. Now, when you get it set up and you're in there configuring everything, first thing you want to do is open the remote access management, enter the ADFS URL first, and then you'll enter the credentials that you used originally to set up the ADFS server. So that would be that same domain admin account you used. You'll also need to select a certificate, and you'll want to use the same certificate that the ADFS server is using.
And we'll talk about installation accounts, service accounts, but best practice is to use service accounts to do these installations. That way, when Daryl leaves the company and they disable his IDs, the whole system doesn't go down.
And then configuring the WAP for the CRM part of this, you'll again just be in the remote access management console. Select the WAP, click publish on the column on the right side, and you'll basically create a new rule. In the pre-authentication you're going to just pick pass-through no matter how tempting the ADFS selection is. And then on the next screen is where you'll enter the first URL. So we'll start with the org URL. That will be the external URL that's set up for external access. You'll select the same certificate used by CRM, and the external URL and the backend server URL are the same. So you'll enter the same thing for both. There's nothing changed there.
And then
you'll repeat this process for the auth URL as well, and optionally the discovery URL. Now, once you get the rule published in the WAP for CRM, you need to disable URL translation. Otherwise, you're going to see a bunch of errors. To do this, PowerShell is used. You need to pull the properties from a git command. So you'll pull the ID from PowerShell and then run a set command on that ID to disable the URL translation.
Yeah, and we have this posted out on the blog site, so if you Google it, you'll find it. But for the most part, you're opening up an admin PowerShell. You're making sure you have the ADFS connectivity module loaded, and then you're running through these commands, as you can see. Sometimes they don't show up. If you're seeing that the set commands are missing, you're either on the wrong server or you don't have the proper PowerShell loaded to see that. That's common in troubleshooting these.
So diving a little deeper into ADFS, if you have a domain that's not necessarily trusted to the domain where your ADFS and your CRM server lives, but those users in the other domain need to be able to authenticate into CRM or Dynamics 365, and there's no VPN tunnel or any networking like that set up, your best option is to create a federation trust. So that's basically having your ADFS server talk to another ADFS server in a different domain. Now, it's pretty simple to set up once you know what you're doing with it. Basically, on this ADFS server used with the CRM in that domain, you'll be creating a claims provider trust for the partner company's federation server. Now, just like you've done a couple times at this point, you grab the ADFS metadata URL of the partner companies or the other domain's ADFS server, put that into the claims provider trust wizard, and then set up the rule to pass through the UPN.
Yeah, same rules. The URL is really what's controlling. You're basically authorizing the other ADFS server. Same setup for Office 365, Dynamics 365, correct, Gage?
Correct.
So that's why a lot of people, moving to Azure-based environments, things like that, this is how you would trust that server to have single sign-on through those domain accounts with your CRM system. This also can be used if, say, you're in a merger and there's two companies' domains. You can use this to auth the second domain to allow access, and then as you merge over in one domain, get rid of the trust.
So after you create the claims provider trust on your ADFS server, you'll need to go to the other ADFS server and create a relying party trust. Basically, same type of scenario. You take your ADFS metadata, you enter it in the wizard on the partner ADFS server. You'll create another rule. This one's just sending LDAP attributes as claims. And
no, Microsoft doesn't let you connect to their ADFS server as far as manually, so they have a process that runs through and does it for you.
Yep. And then once that's set up, of course, you'll want to test it out. Now, the trick is in CRM Dynamics 365, when you set up users from a trusted or an ADFS trusted domain, you need to enter their username in the UPN format. So that would be user@domain.com, not domain/user.
And that's certainly important when you're importing users as well. So make sure you have the correct UPN for them if they're going to be a third-party federation coming in versus the domain, because it won't allow them to log in. So I've seen that on a few go-lives that a couple hundred entries had to be corrected, and it doesn't go well for the customer not understanding that, hey, listen, you have to change it based on this. They just don't understand. So try to be ahead of them and get it done versus having user issues testing. So tips and tricks. Thanks, Gage, for covering that stuff. Pretty much, here's your checklist of what we just talked about. You're going to go through, you install CRM, make sure it's working before you continue going forward. Set up your private and public DNS entries. Put the firewall rules in place. A lot of times, if everything is working internally and you can get to those pages, etc., it means that the firewall is wrong. Don't let your firewall guy talk you into something wrong with your system. If you have those two screens popping up, it's because the firewall rules are not set up correctly, or the DNS entries are not host entries. Those are your two items. Of course, the installation of the SSL certificate, getting it, putting it on the CRM ADFS servers, configuring and installing ADFS, granting the permission to the certificate keys, setting the bindings for HTTPS for the CRM server, moving it to 443. You obviously could have done that in the initial installation if you were already prepping for ADFS or IFD. Configure the CRM system for claims-based. Go over to the ADFS server, set up that internal trust. Go back to CRM, follow the wizard for the IFD implementation. Go back to the ADFS server, install the party trust, all while going back and forth initiating IIS. And then install the WAP if you need it, and then do all your test access. So that's your checklist of really the steps that you're going through in this process. Another trick is the set back connection host names registry key. Around 2008 server, Microsoft determined that there's a loopback error from a security perspective, and they blocked it. So what it means is that a machine itself cannot understand that it's its own name. So when you go to a machine and type in the internal CRM domain.com on that CRM server, it won't find it in the process. So by adding the registration key, that allows you to test from the server. A lot of times people will say, hey, it's working from the client, but it won't work on the server. That's why it was never supposed to work directly from the server. If you want it to work from the server, just enable that key. A lot of us do our installation and testing on the server first. So that's how you can determine how to get past the loopback check. The customizing of the ADFS logon page, small step, but it works really nice for a company. I also like to use it for, I'm in dev, I'm in test, I'm in prod, so people know where they are before they log in when they get prompted for these URLs. Here's some links in regards to where you would be setting it, and then you're going to go into the ADFS login page via PowerShell, and you're going to change these information to have the path of your logo and the path of wherever the illustration is, etc. These are both already in the log. You're just changing the information to go from the Microsoft logo to yourselves. So a lot of people use that. You can change the colors and whatever you like, but it makes a nice difference. The ADFS token lifetime, this is something that gets repeatedly talked about. People claim it's longer than 8 hours. I'm here to tell you that it's not over 8 hours. So when you set the token for expiration, the max is 8 hours. If you set it longer than 8 hours, it will default back to the 15 minutes. This is intended for security. Internally, if you are using the internal URL and have a Kerberos ticket, it won't impact you, right? But externally, if you're sitting at a coffee shop or something like that, that's where you really want to set up how long that token is going to be available. Now, if someone goes to a coffee shop and they log in and leave the browser open in a connection to your session, that's what the timeout you're specifying. If you have people who are working from home that use the system, 6-7 hours a day, then you want to make sure that you set that external token longer so they're not constantly prompted. They will be prompted when they're not using the platform as well. So there's a timeout there as well. But recommendation is to understand that you're going to have to log in and out. We like to train people to say at lunchtime, close off your browser and then just log back in when you come back from lunch. And that pretty much gets rid of the whole ADFS token lifetime conversation. ADFS token certificate rollover. I'm going to let Gage talk about this one. This is probably one of the #1 trouble tickets in both Azure and existing CRM private cloud customers that we have, and really usually come in on Monday and your certificate's rolled over and your system doesn't work. So Gage, why don't you explain a little bit about it?
Yep. As Chris was pointing out, it's the number one cause of system outages. In a nutshell, ADFS has two certificates that it completely manages on its own. It's the token decrypting and the token signing certificate. These certificates are completely 100% just related to the authentication. It does not secure the site. That SSL certificate is separate, and it's called the Service Communication Certificate in ADFS terms. Now, by default, these certificates are configured to expire yearly. About 30 days, I think it is, prior to the actual expiration, ADFS is going to pick up that these are going to expire. It's going to say, hey, actually it's 20 days, it's right there. It's going to pick that up. It's going to create new certificates. It's going to set those new certificates into a secondary slot, kind of just waiting for you there. After 5 days, which is the certificate promotion threshold, it's going to push those secondary certificates into the primary slot. Now, when that happens, CRM doesn't know about that. ADFS is on its side saying, hey, I'm using my new certificates. But CRM's over on its side still trying to use the old certificates. So when you try to authenticate from CRM, it's not going to work. It's going to break and users can't get in. It's very easy to resolve this issue. You basically, from a CRM perspective, just run through those two wizards, the claims wizard and the IFD wizard. Next, finish, next, finish, and then issue an IIS reset on the CRM server. It gets the new metadata from ADFS about these new certificates, and authentication will succeed again.
Yeah, so the idea is if your certificate is expiring every 365 days, if you can time that with your wildcard or those certificate maintenance windows, you can take care of it that way. There's also an event log that you can trap that will tell you that this is happening. It gives you warning messages so you can see it. Once you see the warning message, you schedule your maintenance window, and as Gage said, during that maintenance window, all you do is walk through the wizards again, and it gets the new ADFS token, and you're ready to go. So, but it is kind of difficult when you're in the middle of everybody screaming what's wrong with the server, so just a heads up. Extending the expiration, PowerShell can also extend the expiration as we showed you, and you can see the set ADFS, the set the duration to a different time, and you can set it to urgent. This will allow you to basically stop it from being down and reset the configuration. With an IIS reset, it'll come back up and everything will be working fine.
Kind of just a disclaimer on that. You can't extend the duration or the expiration date on the certificate that's currently loaded into ADFS. Basically what you're setting there is for a future certificate. That's what that second command, the update ADFS certificate, that'll generate new token certificates with that new duration.
And obviously the urgent word makes it happen now.
Yep. And then after that happens, you need to go through the two wizards in CRM and then issue an IIS reset. Because just like with the expiration, ADFS is now using new certificates. And
again, they might work on this in the future. We've talked about it as a bug with Microsoft that ADFS and CRM are disconnected, but that's why it has this issue. Adding new organizations, when you add a new organization, so you create a new database, whether it's test prod or something else, make sure you update the federation metadata. That will allow you to see that new org. Sometimes they don't become available, and you'll have to republish that in the new WAP if you're using WAP. Caution on the cache. A lot of people like to go here and hit delete and not realize the top one is preserving everything. Make sure you check the top one to clean it. When you're going back and forth between multiple ADFS servers, which is not normal for a user, they will experience weird behavior between logons and not being able to log in. Good way to troubleshoot that is by putting your browser in private mode and then seeing if you can connect. If you can, then it likely means that there's something wrong or something has been cached from the other system. So it was never designed to work that way, and that's why people that have administrator access like us will see this issue more than a normal user in a production environment. So I know we're right at the hour. Gage and I will stay as long as possible to answer any questions, but I hope you guys got a good understanding of ADFS, IFD, why it's so difficult to get it right. Remember, it's a team effort. It takes somebody with all of those skills working through the problems. You'll find that a majority of the issues that are out there, either we have updated the wiki articles, the MSDN articles, or we've blogged about what those features are. If you get stuck, remember IIS Reset is your friend. Reset everything and start back over from scratch. Also, remember that any certificate errors that you have will basically stop your ADFS implementation. It will not work. So, see if there's any questions that come up in the window that we can help answer. Otherwise, we thank you for your time today and joining us about CRM and ADFS IFD. Thanks for having us, Julie.
Thank you so much, Chris and Gage. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate everyone's patience with our technical difficulties. Daryl's been troubleshooting for us and actually found an issue on DNS that needs to be corrected, so hopefully we'll get that taken care of and get that ready to go. If you wouldn't mind sending me the recording to this, just plop it somewhere in a cloud and send me a link, and then I'll get it up on our user group.